Hi, Stars. In this episode, I'm going to introduce you to a good friend of mine, an inspired astrologer who also podcasts, Norma Lachance. Welcome, Norma.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you for having me.
So perhaps you could just quickly tell our listeners what type of astrology you practice.
I practice Western astrology. I guess that's pretty much the umbrella term for it. A bit of background. Alison was my first teacher. And so I'm so grateful for everything that I've learned from Alison as she launched me out of the astrological nest, as it were, as I was ready to fly, sort of. But yes, definitely Western astrology.
Right. So I take it that since you've learned your astrology, you've been through the training, you've done some chart consultations, and now you've taken what I call your astrology thrust in a different direction. And we'd be interested to hear a little bit about how this has happened.
Well, yeah, it's a great question. It took a moment to look at my chart before we hopped on to record. And, it's all in the chart. It's all in the natal chart, everybody, just so if you were wondering about that. So yes, I do consultations, but I do remember a specific day in my learning with Alison, and we were talking about lunar phase. So all you listeners out there, look it up. What is lunar phase? And so I discovered that, and it's basically the angular distance between the sun and the moon. I have a disseminating moon. And we were talking about kind of keywords and what does that mean to have a disseminating moon? It's in the waning part of the lunar cycle. And disseminating, as Alison was explaining it to me, giving that, fall, agricultural sort of connection with the lunar phase. And the idea that the disseminating phase is when the branches are kind of waning and they're letting off, seeds, and they're spreading their knowledge out there. And that just made such a connection to me because I'm a former teacher. And the idea that I said, so like pods, spores that are kind of spreading out. And Alison said yes. And I went, like a podcast? And it literally flew into the room at that moment. Wow. And I thought, maybe I should do a podcast. And that's when it started. That was 2019, which, can you believe it? It'll be 4 years this May since I started my podcast. So that's kind of the genesis of it.
Yeah. And so you were learning about lunar phases. Let's consider this perhaps in the middle of maybe your astrological training. It wasn't like you'd finished the whole lot. There were still ways to go. But
oh my gosh, no, I was a baby, as again, like a little bird in the nest trying to figure stuff out. And, Alison always said to me, a lot of people that are training in astrology or just learning about it for themselves get stuck as soon as it's time to give an interpretation or give an opinion. We learn, polarity and, fire and elements and, signs and planets and aspects and all this stuff about astrology, but nobody ventures out to kind of say, this is what it means. And so I thought I need to practice. And poor Alison dealt with all of the homework that I used to send her like week after week. I'm just like, Norma, stop sending me homework. But I needed to practice. And so when this podcast idea kind of floated in, Alison's super encouraging. Just, you know what, Norma? Guess what? Try it. It's a great place to practice doing interpretations and, thinking about, what does, moon in Aquarius mean? Just launch out there. And what the biggest thing that gave me comfort was Alison said, well, look, Norma, no one's listening. No one's actually listening to your podcast. And I thought she's completely right. Because of course, when you start, it's me, my partner, couple of friends. That's all that's listening. And it's grown. I have to say, I'm quite happy to report I have almost 2,000 followers on Spotify that are listening. And I don't know if they listen regularly, but they're following me, air quotes. Yeah.
Wow. And so just to go back to this genesis point of this podcast, had you previously done podcasts? Were you that sort of person?
Not at all. No, not at all. And I took a little bit of education, bit of technology. Thank God my oldest is into tech. So he was super helpful. And I just started talking and I realized that because I'm a former teacher, I can kind of hold it together. I've got the gift of gab, as your listeners can probably tell right now. And it was just a great place to start, just to look at. So what I do in the concept of the podcast, it's a little bit different than Alison's, is I look at the daily transit and I feel sometimes like a weather reporter, but because I'm a teacher, I'm really trying to teach astrology through the podcast. Break it down, make it really simple, make it accessible. Hopefully it's interesting and it's not long. We are talking 10 minutes max. And so that has really been, a great place for me to practice the skill of interpretation in astrology, which I think, we've talked about so many times, people get stuck, as they learn about astrology, they get stuck.
It's true. Yeah, yeah. And you referenced that you were a teacher. Perhaps you could just share with us what sort of teaching you've previously done.
Well, I taught for many years. I'm a mathematician by trade, which generally loses me friends immediately. But I love the mathematics, any branch of mathematics. But when I got into astrology, I realized how mathematically based it is. And so, yes, so I've taught everything, high school, university. I used to prepare teachers for the classroom. So I used to teach teachers how to teach mathematics. And wow. So it's a passion for me. And, what I learned by learning about my chart is everything I learn, all I want to do is teach it. Every time I learn a concept, I just want to turn around and disseminate, like my lunar phase, give out information and help people make astrology make sense to themselves, yes, in their lives.
And this actually leads us, I think, into why you named your podcast What You Did, right?
Well, yeah. So the name of the podcast is Astrology Today. So it's the number 2 day. So hopefully we get the idea that it's almost daily. I started off doing it every single day, which Alison was like, "How are you doing that every day?" But I have a very strong 6th house, which I'm sure your listeners know is all about daily routines. And so doing it every day was quite natural to me. I'm down to now Tuesdays and Fridays, but it is this idea of looking at the daily transit and, like I said, a weather report, as it were, looking at what are the important aspects. What does this have to do with my chart, Norma? And, the idea that, we're trying to make astrology accessible for people and hopefully improve their life.
Okay. And so there's actually a number, isn't there, in your title?
Yes. So the number 2 day, and you can find it pretty much everywhere. And why 2? Well, 2 is my favorite number. It is the only even prime number. And so that pretty much puts nerd right across my forehead. I love numbers and what they mean. And so there, because I guess the biggest connection between mathematics and astrology is patterns. It's all about patterns. Mathematics is about recognizing patterns, and astrology is also about recognizing patterns. And so it was a natural fit for me.
It is. And I've always found that interesting that you actually chose the number 2 for that particular reason, whereas you've actually got a reason to choose the number, which is kind of interesting in itself. But to get back to what you were just saying now about the patterns and the maths in astrology, I know that it's when you were looking at the aspects within your chart and you were calculating the orbs of all of the aspects by hand, I had never seen so much homework in my life. And the fact that you did it not just on your own chart, you did multiple charts to calculate, to fully understand applying and separating aspects and what they are in degrees and minutes. And also then if the one's retrograde, then it's going the other way. And then if they're both retrograde, then they're both going the other way. And you actually fully understood it. And I see it even today with some students I have today who are saying, the what? And it really is very often the basic maths, and it really is, well, it's not that basic, I suppose, but people just go, whoa, I don't get it. I don't get it. This is at 8 and that's at 16. What? Whereas you had gone over and above what was required to fully understand the maths behind the chart that is actually buried in the numbers. Would you say that?
It really is, and I say on a regular basis, about once a week, I will calculate a chart by hand. And Alison remembers probably the day that I received, it's called a book of tables, and it basically explains using tables kind of like an ephemeris, but a way to calculate all the house cusps. And I got that book and I locked myself in my office for 2 weeks to figure out how to calculate them by hand. But, yes, I love numbers. I love patterns. I love the mental arithmetic of it. I have a lot of air in my chart, so that intellectual pursuit just is super fun for me.
Yeah.
But the other piece is, it's part of what can we say? It's kind of like igniting the cosmos, if you could say that. It's a way for me to connect with the chart almost at a spiritual or an intuitive level. As I'm calculating the chart, I get more of a sense of who I'm dealing with, what perhaps the themes are within the chart. And I've learned that over time. And I find that if you're looking for a pattern, you can't just do one example. You must do multiple examples. Now, let's face it. We all come to astrology with one big question in mind. What does this have to do with me?
Yes.
It's all about, right? And how often that, and I have to say that the big hook for me was, I started taking classes from Alison way back. And I don't know if you remember this, Alison, it was 2018. So that's a few years ago. And you made an off the cuff comment about one of the planets in one of my houses. And I went, what? Wait a minute. How can you possibly know that? And it wasn't that, Alison is on high as a guru knowing all of these things. It's just in the chart. And that fascination for me is what keeps me coming back to astrology, is those moments when my clients feel seen, because in that moment, I felt seen. I felt like there's obviously something more to this than just, oh, I'm a Scorpio, I'm a Libra. There's like way more to it. And I think I don't think, I know that this is my third phase of life, as it were, to research and understand and really dive into astrology. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting how you have learned what I like to call I call it the cornerstones, the 4 cornerstones of astrology, the signs, planets, houses, and aspects. And once you've got that knowledge under your belt, and then we're adding bells and whistles, but you have taken your practice down the podcast route with previous knowledge you had in life that you brought to the astrology, and now you have created this fabulous podcast with hundreds of views or thousands of views, I beg your pardon, that is being listened, and you're sharing your message with hundreds of people, hundreds and thousands of people out there.
Well, and I hope so. It's always about, and what I end off my podcast saying, I hope you get something out of this. I'm always interested in your questions and your feedback. And, podcasting is an interesting medium. It's actually quite intimate, right? Because my voice goes right into their ears. Hopefully it's making sense. For me, the challenge was in the beginning was to paint a picture, because I don't have my whiteboard behind me anymore when I was in the classroom where I had, examples and visuals and manipulatives and stuff that I could use. Here, I had to actually use my words to describe what I was talking about. And so it forced me to talk about, for example, I talk about my one analogy, a conjunction. What is a conjunction? 2 planets that are within 8 degrees of each other, or a stellium, 3 or more planets that are stuck together at the hip. So my analogy is, imagine you're going for lunch and the only place to sit in the restaurant is at the counter. And so you're all sitting at the counter and you're kind of trying to have a conversation with your friend, but you're all facing forward, but you're trying to get along, but you kind of bristle at the same time. So I say a conjunction is the same thing. Planets are facing forward. They are aware of the other planets that are around them, and they try to blend, but most of the time they kind of bristle at the same time. So to come up with an explanation that people can relate to is part of the challenge I find in podcasting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting how you've actually taken the basic astrology and shifted your direction from what people would anticipate to actually put it into this podcast. So you're saying it's coming out, twice a week now? You're okay, and you're available on all the directories, and anyone can find you. We'll put a link below as well.
Yeah, all the regular spots, Spotify, Apple, all the places that you can find podcasts, I'm there. And I'm doing Tuesdays and Fridays now. And I find it's really kind of snowballed from there, is that it's capturing a bit of a larger themes in a way. So again, when I talk about patterns, when I was doing it every day, okay, let's face it, not a ton is changing day to day to day. So now I look at the week. What's going on this week? How does it feel? Who's it going to affect? I also have a few bonus episodes that I do.
Okay.
If there's, I do horoscopes once a month, doing horoscopes at the beginning of the month. For example, we're coming up to the beginning of May here. I'm not sure when this is going to drop, but at the beginning of each month, I am doing horoscopes. All 12 signs comes out as a bonus. And I also sometimes will do, kind of special occasions, if you can call it that. New moons, full moons, eclipses. If we have big planetary ingresses, of course, we've just had Pluto moving into Aquarius. That's a big shift. So I might do something special having to do with that. And maybe I'll take time out of podcasts to answer questions, because let's face it, everybody wants to know, what does this have to do with my chart? So I'll get a lot of questions from my listeners.
Yes. So if somebody somebody who's listening to this now today wanted to pose a question to you or contact you, where would they go?
Best way to get a hold of me is my email. I know it seems archaic, but true. My email, astrologydiva, that's DVA @gmail.com, is absolutely the best way to get a hold of me.
Perfect. So we'll put a link down there as well below. And while you're here, do you have any other New Age practices that you work on or have been working on?
Because I'm a mathematician, I have a lot of interest in numbers. And so numerology, I have done some work in that area. I am a life coach, which is kind of another kind of area that has brought me to astrology. And so I do combine life coaching with astrology when the client is interested, because let's face it, not everybody's into astrology. And I do find that it helps with the life coaching, because you can find themes that you maybe wouldn't normally get to in a coaching situation.
I know we got together at one point and we collaborated about numerology for a YouTube video at one point. And it's interesting that, again, this is part of what you knew already before you came to astrology, and the coaching as well, which has now stood you in good stead to actually move into this podcast world that you are now. I want to say dominating. Why wouldn't I? That I am now dipping my toe in tentatively, because we just got to that stage in my life. But it's interesting how all the roads that you've taken during your life has got you to this point.
Absolutely. And, it really took off, I think, during the pandemic, right? It was a way to connect, because of course we were all isolated. We were all in our, my studies just took off. Alison can attest. Yes, there was a lot of homework coming through because I didn't have anything else to do. I wasn't outside my place. So all I did was study all the time. It was just such a pleasure, I have to say. And, I was noticing, again, a little more astrology, that transiting Pluto was coming through my 11th house during the pandemic. And that was really around a transformation of the groups with which I was associating. And that change has changed me for the rest of my life. I used to be, I'm still quite active, but I was an athlete most of my life. And that was where I spent most of my time. Now I'm still quite active, but I am shifting into this astrology world and connecting with astrologers from around the world, as opposed to athletes or swimming, biking, running, what I used to do. And so this is really an indication of, the pandemic, of course, all those Capricorn planets coming through and the change all happening in my 11th house. And so it makes sense that this is kind of where I've landed.
Wow. And of course, I think by the looks of it, Pluto is still going to be in that 11th house for several years to come. Where do you anticipate your podcast will be a few years down the line? Or do you have a vision of where you're going with it? Or is it one step at a time at this point?
I mean, the disseminating moon will tell you it is one pod at a time that you
one pod at a time.
Right. You plant a seed and you hope it grows, and you hope, right, that what's interesting is now that, things are starting to open up a little bit, I'm also really into yoga. I've just connected with a yoga studio where I can go in person. And some of the people are like, hey, I listened to your podcast today. I went, what? It was like, Oh, so I do want to have a positive influence, hopefully, out there. I love to teach. That it might morph into that at some point. I really enjoy reading charts, connecting with clients, which I've been doing mostly over Zoom because of the reality of the pandemic. But I've got to tell you, one of the positives out of the pandemic is we've been able to connect with people from all over the world, face to face, using Zoom or whatever it is that you're using. And I find that that's just such a gift. So I say on a regular basis that part of the reason I'm into astrology is it's numbers and people together. And it's like two of my favorite things. I'm fascinated by people. I have a huge curiosity about people. And astrology has just given me a doorway into their lives.
Wow.
I have been doing some interesting sessions over Zoom. I've had a few companies contact me. One, during Christmas, sometimes you'll get like the gift certificate thing, but I've had a few companies contact me and say, can you do sort of a business-based group? So they'll bring in their sector together, 6 to 8 people, and I'll do their charts and I'll do kind of astrology 101. That's been super fun. I've gotten some great feedback about that. And it's kind of fun, but it's also a bit telling as well. I've done larger group sessions, like 80 people on Zoom, where we talk about astrology and what does it mean. What's interesting is companies are kind of using it as sort of a Myers-Briggs color theory, just another way of looking at people's tendencies. And given that in the pandemic, so many people have been brought together, but they've actually never been IRL in real life. This is another way for them to connect.
Yeah. No, this is great. So as a seasoned podcaster, do you have any advice that you would give to anyone starting out an astrology podcast at this stage? She said with three episodes out.
Well, I know you well enough, Alison, to know that whatever you put out is going to be high quality. That's absolutely for sure. I guess my tips would be, if I was going to give any tips, is do it regularly.
Yeah.
Don't worry about being perfect. And, because it's such an intimate medium, people appreciate the authenticity that you bring, whoever it is that you bring to it. Bring yourself to it. Let your personality come through, because people are going to really appreciate that. I make the joke to my partner all the time that I probably could edit a bit more, but I don't. So you get what you get. And I hope that
yes.
Yeah, it hopefully gives it like I said, an authenticity to it. Not to say that I don't prepare, because I'm an astrologer. I take that seriously. So I do have a script. I look at what I'm going to talk about. The astrology is accurate. That's very important to me, that I am knowledgeable. I've got a very strong Saturn, people. So being knowledgeable and having mastery over the astrology, hence all the practice, is really important to me. So I want to be a reliable source to my listeners. So that part is know your stuff, right? Don't be just turning on the podcast and like chanting about whatever it is. Do your research. So have a script, be prepared, but also be spontaneous and authentic.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great advice, that to be yourself, because isn't it Oscar Wilde who said, be yourself because everyone else is taken?
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
And so I understand that you also have a monthly group, a moon group. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that as well?
Well, and I don't think anybody is going to be surprised when they find out that I have Sun in Cancer, so ruled by the moon. So I am very affected by the moon. And I got inspired. It was a workshop that Alison did again and talked about new moon wishing, I think is what you called it,
right.
Alison, right?
Yeah.
New moon wishing, and talked about, where's the moon in your chart? And I really just kind of sunk into this group that I started, again, ramped up during the pandemic as a place for us to connect. So every single new moon, we meet on Zoom. I talk about the theme of the new moon. For example, this past new moon, of course, was a solar eclipse in Aries. Wow. Fiery solar eclipse, super interesting. And then we look at everybody's chart, and it's a really supportive group. It's not recorded or anything. There's no charge. Everybody can just pitch up and show up. I won't lie, as I say always, there may be an adult beverage involved. once in a while, as it is in the evenings. But, anywhere from, 8 to 15 people show up from all over the place. There's a kind of a regular core of people that are there. We look at everybody's chart, see where the new moon is, set intentions. It's just it's been, definitely through COVID, it's been very supportive, I think, for people. We all know that there's been just big challenges with mental health, and just this ability to connect regularly has been great. And guess what? We're going to carry on. So yes, the new moons occur once a month. Obviously, that's part of the lunar cycle, but the new moon session, we meet prior to it. So we capture that new moon energy each month. And there's a link and a Zoom link, and the best way to get a hold of me or to be included in the invitation, send me an email to that fantastic email, astrologydiva@gmail.com, and I will definitely get the link to you.
That's great. And I think your new moon group is that what you're calling it? Your new moon group, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I think that is a great way because it's complementary. It's open to everyone. You're being inclusive. Basically, anyone on the planet can join in, get the invitation and participate in this group. So how long are these group sessions usually?
They're generally not more than an hour. I don't like wasting people's time. If a ton of people show up because I want to get through everybody's chart, I don't think we've done one that's been more than an hour. And they are also an opportunity for people to ask questions, right? And it's a very safe environment. We have a lot of fun, and I think people enjoy learning more about astrology, looking at other people's charts, because let's face it, we're all just voyeurs in life wanting to look at other people's chart. But again, this idea of practice, that you get to learn more about astrology rather than just looking at your own chart, you can look at and talk about other people's charts.
Yeah. And do you think this new moon group that you're running is also a reflection of that disseminating moon phase, where you are imparting all this knowledge through the moon, which is your favorite luminary, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And it's just an opportunity for me to pitch up again and do more teaching. I love to teach. It's very much, sun in the third house, right? Mercury in Gemini in the third is God help us all. I'm a teacher, always have been, lined up my stuffed toys when I was a kid and taught. So that will never stop.
Yeah, I always say you've got to play to your strengths. And I think, Norma, you certainly are doing that.
And I hopefully make it fun. It doesn't need to be heavy. There's lots of people that have a different take on astrology, look at things maybe a bit more seriously than I do. But I think that the lightness makes it accessible, makes it approachable for everybody. And hopefully they're learning something.
Sounds great. Okay, so Norma, what type of astrological services do you offer and that people can actually get from you?
Thanks so much for asking that. Yes, I am a working astrologer, and that includes a variety of services. Certainly natal chart analysis at the bottom, because at the bottom of it all is our chart. That's really important. I've also done work in vocational astrology that relates your work with your chart and to finding out what's the best thing, maybe a life path, what's your vocation. That really pairs well with my life coaching as well. I also do synastry, which is relationship, looking at two people together. How do they mesh? I've also done that. And I think I've already mentioned predictive astrology, which is, of course, looking forward, perhaps a solar return chart and or the transits for the upcoming year. So podcasting is a fantastic medium, whether or not it's about astrology or not. I read a statistic recently, 70,000 different podcasts available on a weekly basis. Think about that. There's a podcast about everything. Now, I like to make the joke that I've got a perfect face for podcasting. There's a reason why I've chosen podcasting over video. Video requires, lighting, and you got to kind of look okay. And there's a way more editing that goes into it. Whereas, as I've mentioned a couple of times, I find podcasting a much more intimate experience for me and for my listeners. And it's way more accessible. They can be out for a power walk. They can be driving to work, doing the dishes. You don't have to sit down and watch the video. It's a way bigger commitment, video, I find, YouTube or whatever you're using. Whereas podcasting is much more accessible. And I really feel it is the medium of the future as we move forward. Of course, Pluto and Aquarius, all about new technology, transformational technology. This is completely in line with that.
Yeah. I totally agree. It's I've been doing YouTube for 5 years now, over 130 videos up, and it's a lot. It's
amazing.
A lot of work. And so
did you find that maybe I can ask you a question. Did you find it tough to find guests, like people that were reticent to do YouTube videos with you? Because I know you did a lot of them on your own, but you also did a lot of interviews.
I hadn't finished talking about what I wanted to talk about yet. So to be honest, I wasn't really looking for guests. They were just people I happen to know. Right. But I still had more and I still do have more, which is
Of course. I mean, you're 30 plus years of being in astrology. You have a bit of knowledge to hit us with. Yes.
So they say you've got to find, if you want to be a podcaster, which is where I'm going as we speak, it's you've got to have something you can talk about for like a week solid and not run out of material. And this is it. And this is really why I think I pivoted to it. Apart from I've got this massive Jupiter transit across the top of the chart, and we all knew that was going to change something. But anyway, and it's just I've got enough to say. I wouldn't say I struggled to find guests. I didn't really look, to be honest. honest. Yeah. No,
it's good. No, you do have a ton to say, and I think that's right. Is having a ton of material and just being able, the gift of gab. That's what my mom used to call it. Just like blah blah blah, on and on and on we go.
Yes. So this is it. I mean, I've got Mercury on the ascendant, and I might as well use it. So why not? Okay. All right. So as you may know, instead of doing a lightning round at the end, we do what we are calling the Astro Holy Trinity, which is the ascendant, sun, moon. And Norma, if you could share that with us, that would be great.
Absolutely. So ascendant in Aries, bit of a story there, but we don't have to go there. Sun in Cancer, moon in Aquarius.
Amazing. So we will work, we'll do our calculation.
Okay.
I'll tell you it straight now. It's going to be the +1, -1, +1, which will give us a +1. Where the keywords I'm using for this now is Toasty and Yellow Heart for you.
Toasty and Yellow Heart for me. I love it. Well, yes, your listeners won't know, but I do have my blonde hair. So that certainly speaks to that. Yes, I had to grow into my Aries ascendant. I just want to say that. And Alison was very encouraging, like, Norma, because I had to get my chart rectified. Not a medical procedure, people. Just check it out. And
it felt like it.
Maybe. Norma, just try on the Aries ascendant. And of course, everybody that meets me, anybody who knows anything about astrology went, well, yeah, Aries ascendant. Got it. But the Cancer.
Let me tell you, Norma was trying to hide behind a little Pisces ascendant. And we were at an astrology event, and I was saying to them, she thinks she's a Pisces ascendant. And everybody was saying, what? No. Yeah. But it sits well. It fits well. You're happy with it. It's great. So there we go. So ascendant, Cancer, Aquarius. Interesting combination.
A little bit of everything except Earth.
Right.
So fire, water, and air all together, but nowhere. Very little Earth in my chart. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Norma, thank you so much for being with us here today. I'm sure we will get together again in the future, because there's many other things I'd like to discuss with you, Anticia being one of them, but that's a story for another day. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story about how you've taken an aspect of astrology, there's the pun, and turned it into how you're practicing astrology in your life.
This has been just such a great pleasure, and thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the two main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer, or someone who's learning astrology, or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.